Closing the Gap, 50 Years Seeking Equal Pay is made possible by the Eden Hall Foundation seeks to improve the quality of life in Pittsburgh and southwestern Pennsylvania. Through the lens of women's issues, it continues the stewardship of Sebastian Mueller in the areas of human services, health, education, and the arts. And by Chatham University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has empowered women for 145 years, advancing women's causes with their Centers for Women in Politics, Entrepreneurship, and the new Chatham University Women's Institute opening in 2015. And these additional donors: Kathy Raphael, Buchanan Ingersoll and Rooney, PC, Georgia Berner, MSA, and the Women and Girls Foundation. Hello, and welcome to the special presentation of Closing the Gap, Financial Freedom, Standing on Your Own Financial Feet After Graduation. I'm your host, Tonya Caruso. Graduating into a gender pay gap means from the very beginning of your career, you have less money to pay for living expenses, less money to deal with college loan debt, and less money to save for your future. Our goal today is to tell college women and recent graduates what you need to know about the gender pay gap so you can set a strong foundation now for long-term financial security. And we want you to be a part of this conversation too, so send us your questions and comments. Our social media team is standing by and they'll get your questions to our expert here in the studio. And speaking of our expert, I'm very happy to welcome our first guest, Sean McGreevy. He is a certified educator in personal finance and he teaches a course at Chatham University in Pittsburgh called Financial Wellness. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tonya.
There is so much involved in this issue, but let's begin with the basics and what you want college graduates to be thinking about and kind of the basics they need to know to have a baseline in financial literacy.
Sure. I think starting with, it doesn't have to be complicated, and that we want students to be educated about personal finance, and that and really there's a lot of nuances and mechanics to the financial world, but really it's about their habits and about their attitudes around money, and that's where we focus in our course.
And so is one of the basics first sort of separating what are needs and what are wants?
Absolutely.
And what sort of the mind frame should be?
Sure. So we want students to live beneath their means, right? And so if they've got a certain amount of income, that they are able to do a little saving and then spend wisely.
Right. And so really, this is a big stressor on students or finances. In fact,
sure, absolutely. The number one stressor for students, and we know students today are under lots of stressors. The number one stressor is academics, of course, for a college student. But the second stressor is finances and how to manage on a budget when you're a college student, and then how to finance school, how to pay for college.
Right. And so one thing women can do to help lessen the stress is to gain a better understanding of the gender pay gap and how it affects their finances. And so we have a couple of graphics that we want to share with folks to give us a clear picture of what happens to women almost immediately after they graduate into the pay gap. So let's take a look at this first one. The American Association of Universities conducted a study called Graduating to a Pay Gap, and it researched the pay gap between male and female college students working full-time 1 year after graduation. It found that 1 year out of college, women who were working full-time earned, on average, just 82% of what their male peers earned. And I do want to point out that the study controlled for factors known as affect earnings, such as occupation, college major, and the hours worked. Now let's take a look at the second one as well. From the AAUW report. This one was called Behind the Pay Gap, and the study also controlled for factors that affect pay, and they found that 10 years after graduation, women were paid only 69% of what men were paid. So this brings home, first off, why this is such an important issue for everyone. And so when you talk to your students, and when you talk to female students, what factors do you tell them that they can control to sort of begin to help to shape their futures.
Right. Again, it's about, I think, attitudes and habits. We talk about wealth as options. And so if you're managing your money in appropriate ways and building wealth, and again, wealth is not about a fancy car, it's about having options. And so if you have a savings account, if you have an emergency fund, and if you're spending wisely, well, then that's just going to give you more options. And that's what we want for our students as they leave Chatham.
So habits and attitudes that you begin to start with. And then there's money, credit, debt, spending, savings, all of these play in. So let's sort of break this all down and let's begin. You kind of already touched on the idea of wealth and how that you can begin to build wealth. And so what right now do students tell you is their number one concern? What do they want to purchase, or what's sort of the biggest stressor
Sure,
there?
we're a car culture, and so if people think about buying that first car as they walk away from their college experience.
So most of them, so are they talking about saving for a car, or is that just, that's the
yeah,
first
they
thing
would
they're going to
probably
buy?
think about, because when you listen to car commercials, it's about, here's what the payment is a month. Here's not the sticker price for the car, and here's the credit options that you have. And so we want students to save money and buy things that they can afford.
Right. So other things they should be concerned about, especially when it comes to creating a financial plan. What do you tell them, and how do you explain the difference between fixed costs and variable costs?
Right, sure. So your fixed costs are those bills that come in every month that, maybe your insurance, your car insurance, your college tuition, those things that you don't have any really choice over. And then your variable costs would be, entertainment and eating out and buying coffee and those kinds of things.
And how difficult for them to sort of put that in line, that these variable costs can really bring you down and make a huge difference?
Sure, yeah. I think we talk about habits and attitudes, and so that's the first thing that I ask students in my course is to really monitor their spending for a couple weeks or a month and see where those dollars are going, because oftentimes they're going to those variable costs, which they have some choice over. And if they're making good choices, and they've got better habits, well, then some of that money gets to stay with them.
Right. I know we're going to talk a great deal about the credit card industry. What do you say to them about focusing on sticking in school, or else they don't have a degree and they still have all of this debt?
Absolutely, I think it's a problem in our country as student retention, right? So students staying in school and finishing, so they have the income that matches that bachelor's degree, and so that's our first priority is helping students manage their money in ways that help them stay in school and finish that degree, so they do have that income as they walk away.
All right. Well, remember, our social media team is standing by to take your questions, and right now we're going to take a question that came in through our Closing the Gap YouTube channel.
Hi, my name is Lucy and I'm from Pennsylvania, and the topic that I wanted to bring up was financial planning while in graduate school. I actually just recently graduated from undergrad and immediately went to graduate school, and I'm still living on the quote-unquote undergraduate budget, while also trying to become an adult and pay for my own things. So I was wondering if you guys had any tips or suggestions for me for saving money on a daily basis, because obviously in 2 years I hope to obtain a full-time salary outside of graduate school. So I was wondering if you guys had any tips or suggestions of how I could build a base foundation for my bank account. Thank you.
Excellent question, and we'll take some more social media questions throughout the segment. So I would assume that Lucy's already on the right track because she's at least thinking about this. So what kind of advice do you have for her?
Well, the thing that I liked about what Lucy said was that she talked about being on an undergraduate budget. And so for me, that means living below your means and being mindful of your income and not trying to live like you're middle class when you're in graduate school. And so I think that's important to moving through a graduate education is trying to be mindful of your budget and try to spend the least amount as possible as you're considering those variable costs.
All right. Okay. Let's take our first social media question.
We have a question from Emily on Facebook. She asks, as an upcoming college graduate, is it important to have both a savings fund and an emergency fund? What's the difference?
Excellent question.
It is an excellent question. And I
Thank
would
you.
say as a college graduate, you should have kind of three pieces of your savings plan. First is your emergency fund, right? That's if your car breaks down or if you get sick or if something happens to you. And I keep that in a separate account as we talk to our students in our financial wellness class. The second thing is saving for the next big thing. Is that a car? Is that a house? Is that graduate school? And then third is long-term savings. So saving for a dignified retirement. And we're usually trying to shoot around 10, 15% of your income.
And so to do this simultaneously, you believe they should be doing all three at once?
Well, I would say starting with the emergency fund, because we don't want to go to in debt if we have an emergency if the car breaks down.
Right.
And so that's my first goal. And then kind of considering what the next big thing is, and if we've got a looming cost that we can see on the horizon, well, let's save up money so we don't have to go into debt to solve whatever problem that may present.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we're trying to get folks to grow their savings muscle, right? And so that, if I'm in the habit and have the attitude around 10 or 15 or 20% of every paycheck that I bring home, I'm going to put away. That's that long-term thing that we want people to learn, and we want that habit to really develop. And you can do that as a student.
Okay, so let's get to the specifics of budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the first thing you say to the students about budgeting?
Well, budgeting isn't really hard, right? You have income and you have outgo. And so, your income should be pretty measurable. You have a student employment job, 10 hours a week, that would be, I don't know, 300 some odd dollars per month. And so you know what your income is. And so that kind of goes at the top of the page. And then you think about those fixed costs. And then anything that's left at the bottom of the page is your money where you're, have an opportunity to maybe go to the movies or have a night out.
Right, and so those things, it might be your rent, those are all fixed costs, the things.
right.
So what are some of the things that students most often overlook?
Well, I think part of the budget is again about your habits, about sticking to that budget, and so it's really the human factor in making the budget work that I think often goes awry when students talk about budgeting. So yeah, I would say that.
Do you recommend that they keep track of everything?
Yeah, it's so easy to do that these days with the way that our checking accounts are all online, and we can really track every single expenditure, and so. You want to make sure that, the budget that you plan on at the beginning of the month and looking at your checking account at the end of the month, did you stick to that budget?
Right, and we spoke briefly about the fixed costs versus the variable costs. Eating out, new phones, clothing. Do you find that your students, these are things that are taking their money, or since they've been in your class, are they all lined up and doing all the right things?
I think it's we are all humans and we all have habits, and so I think that sometimes we can all slip. We talk about folks that are ultimate savers or maybe they're ultimate spenders, and so I think it's part of this and why we talk about financial wellness is about knowing myself and knowing where my gaps are, right? So I know when I have cash in my pocket, I can't account for it, and I don't know where it goes at the end of the month, and so I like using my debit card because I can keep track of my spending.
Right, and so when you put it into perspective, if you buy a $3 cup of coffee every weekday, at the end of the year, that's more than $3,000. And that can make a huge difference. So you try to drive home to students, correct? What do you try to get them to see from an example like this?
Well, I don't, I don't think I'm opposed against a nice cup of coffee, but it's about sitting down at the beginning of the month and saying, okay, here's the money I get to spend on coffee, right? And is that within, a reasonable ratio of my monthly income? And so. Sitting down and with that, with all those numbers on paper and trying to make some tough decisions, and ultimately, living below our means that we need to sacrifice, and that we can't have everything that we want, and we can't spend every dollar that comes in.
What are some of the things you hear from your students? What are some of the things they complain about or they struggle with most as you lay out this perfect idea of this is the way to get ahead?
Right.
What are some of the things they complain about or deal with?
Well, I think, ultimately we started the class because we wanted folks to have a plan as they graduated, and I think so folks are, I think, nervous about their student loans, right? There's a lot of students that have loans, and that I think gives students a lot of anxiety, and so really that's where we started this class was, hey, if folks have a plan, maybe we have an opportunity to lessen that anxiety as we send them off into the quote unquote real world.
All right, and and again, we remind you we will take questions from social media and our social media experts. If you have any questions, you can join us at the podium. Putting this together, so obviously you saw a need to put this class together and to educate folks. What were you seeing and hearing on campus?
Well, yeah, some folks are would find themselves in trouble with their spending, right? And that they had more outgo than they had income, and so.
Do you find that most of your students are working and that's where they're getting this money, or are these budgets from allowances that their parents might be sending?
I would say a lot of our students work on our campus. We have over 400 student employment jobs, 10 hours a week, $8 an hour. I think work is good for college students, and so even that, even a small part-time job I think is a good thing. And so yeah, so most students I think are making some money over the summer, and they've got a little savings account, and that gets them through the year. But lots of students are working hourly, either on campus or at an off-campus job.
So probably varies on the amount of money a student is making, but how much money do you think is reasonable for a student to spend on variable costs throughout a week?
Sure, yeah. So for me, it's, my primary goal is for students to develop that savings habit. And so as you start at the top of the page with that income, and then think about your fixed costs, and so like your cell phone, for example, maybe gasoline or your car insurance, and then you've got a little chunk of money left at the bottom of the page, and that's your variable. And so I want some savings to come out of that. I want folks to make some good decisions about pulling some money aside and making that conscious decision to put it away for that rainy day.
All right, well, there we go. Well, we're going to continue our conversation with Sean McGreevy and learn all about managing credit card debt. But first, take a look at how students are racking that debt up while they're still in school.
According to figures from the Federal Reserve, the total consumer debt in the United States topped $3.34 trillion by February of 2015. Here's how that debt breaks down by college grade level. Freshmen and seniors rack up the biggest credit card debt, carrying a total card balance of around $610. Juniors come in slightly under that at $547. And sophomores show the lowest credit card debt at $258.
Our social media team is standing by to get your questions to our guest, Sean McGreevy. He is a certified educator in personal finance from Chatham University in Pittsburgh. So we just watched that, and if folks are racking up this debt while in school, what does that mean as they start after graduation?
Sure, and I would assume you mean credit card debt
Right.
that they're racking up. And so significant credit card debt with a student that's an undergrad or a graduate student would suggest to me that they are not living below their means, or that they don't have an emergency plan. And so, my goal for them would be to monitor their spending, and be living below their means, and then also having a plan besides a credit card to solve problems if they get sick or the car breaks down.
Right. So it used to be on every campus, every corner, there was a credit card company that had a booth set up. And so it seems to make sense. What do you want to say to students about credit card and their credit score and how that is all impacted?
Sure. Well, I think we don't want folks to have bad credit. And so most students that have signed for a student loan or that have a credit card in their name have some kind of credit score. I think I want to live a life, and I want to be at a place in my life where I pay for the things that I can afford. And so, living a life of credit and dependent on credit is not where I want students to end up. And I think oftentimes in our culture, we are very much focused on debt and buying things on debt. And I want folks to be mindful of that they receive so many marketing messages every single day about you need this credit card, or you need this car, or you need this this thing that you can't necessarily afford, but we can make it affordable for you because you'll go into debt with us. And we want folks to live a life where they're living within their means.
Right. Well, let's take a social media question.
This question is from YouTube, from Carly. She asked, "What advice do you have for me to build my credit back up after I graduate if I accumulated credit card debt while I was still in school?"
Okay, so it's not a matter of the prevention, it's already happened.
Right.
So how do we help? What are the first steps?
Yeah, so I think being educated about what creates the credit score, right? So the credit score isn't about your wealth or your ability to earn an income, right? Your credit score is really about your relationship with debt, and so you don't want that debt to go bad. And so ultimately, I want my students to be out of debt, right? And so having a plan to move away from debt, and that would involve, again, budgeting and living within your means and trying to aggressively pay that off, because I want folks to have options, right? And that wealth equals options, and I don't know that you can build wealth with significant debt.
So is this when you hit the host, if the host says, well, then do you get another credit card that has a 0% introductory rate or a lower rate and then transfer the balances and pay them off?
Yeah.
Or is that bad news?
I think financial experts would say, you can't borrow your way out of debt, right? And that that deep sacrifice that you might have delayed because you weren't living within your means, now it's time to make that sacrifice and to dig in and make some money and make some sacrifices and pay the debt off.
Okay, so you hear about a FICO score all the time, and it's on every commercial you see on
Absolutely.
TV. Explain the point that you tried to drive home, that a FICO score is not a measure of your wealth.
It's not. It's not. It's about how much debt you have and if you paid it back on time. And what your capacity is for more debt. And so, again, I want folks to, do some research and understand what that FICO score is. But I think the credit card industry spends a lot of money driving home the point that you need this FICO score, and this FICO score is really a representation of your ability to succeed, and it really isn't. It's only a representation of your ability to take out debt and pay that debt back off.
So every student watching this is saying right now, in an ideal world, it would be great not to have a credit card, but you need a credit card to rent a car, to book airline tickets, etc. What's your answer to that?
Well, most debit cards will do everything that a credit card will do, and so I think that, again, we're handed this sentiment through our culture, largely by the credit card companies, right? So they talk about miles, right? That somehow we're gonna beat them at their game, right? When they spend $4 billion a year on marketing alone, right? And so, what we talk about in our class is about myths, and about being smart, and about doing your research, and about understanding what messages were being sent and how to be critical thinkers, right? And that's really what college is about.
All right, let's take another question from social media.
This question is from Samantha on Facebook. She asks, what are some tips to successfully making your credit card payments along with student loan payments? Is one more important to make than the other?
Excellent question. Is one more important to make than the other?
Right. I mean, some people will start to do a bunch of math around interest rate, for example, right? And I would say for probably the average college student, their loan is much, much larger than their credit card debt. I hope so. And so, again, I want students, I want young adults to be out of this cycle of being in debt. And so I would recommend folks being out of that credit card debt just as fast as they possibly can. So saving up that emergency fund so they don't have to depend on the credit card for an emergency, and then attacking that credit card debt. Of course, not neglecting their student loan payment, but I'm not going to pay any extra on student loans while I'm in credit card debt. I'm going to try to get out of that credit card debt so I can.
Should you pay extra on the credit card if possible?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in most cases, the student loan is fixed, and so the credit card.
Right. So I mean, I think the credit card minimum payment would have you in debt for 10 or 20 years, right. So I think you need to be aggressive in order to be out of that relationship.
Right. Let's take another social media question.
This question is from Simone on Twitter. Are there any good financial tracking or budgeting apps that you would suggest?
Excellent question.
That is a good question. I think that I like Cash Course, right? We've been in a relationship with Cash Course at Chatham University as an opportunity and a resource. I think most banks that folks have their credit card or their
checking or savings account.
Yeah, exactly, right. Have an app that will connect them on their phone, and they can stay in tune with how they're spending and be mindful of that. And so, I think there's a lot of examples out there. There's a lot of free examples out there that folks can access. Whatever app it is easy for you to be able to be mindful of your spending, I think is a good one.
Right, and something you can refer to easily and see where you are.
Sure.
And how often do you tell students, should they be tracking this every day? Should they be tracking this once a week? How do you tell them about how often they should really be looking at how much they're spending?
Well, I think, it probably depends on the person. But, I'm always surprised when a student doesn't really kind of know what the balance is in their checking account, right? And so I don't know that we want folks to obsess about it and think
Right.
about it every single day. But, I think it's about kind of tending your garden, right? And that takes work, and it takes, an opportunity to cultivate and weed and sow. And so for most folks, I think it takes a lot more time in the beginning as they are maybe trying to change some habits. And as they establish those habits, then it probably is less often.
Right, sort of playing off the student loan. If someone has multiple credit cards, in what order then should they begin to pay off the
Right. balances
there? What do you look at? Interest rates, the amount that's on the card? What's the order folks should follow?
Sure. There's some financial experts out there that talk about really trying to drive momentum. And so oftentimes folks ask this question when they're deeply in debt. And that seems like a very daunting task to dig your way out of that. And so ultimately you want to see some success because, again, remember we talked about it's about habits and it's about attitudes. And part of it's about hope, and that if you're deeply in debt, you want to see your way out of that mess. And so I want folks to gain that momentum by paying off the smallest one first,
Smallest
right?
one
And then
first.
that frees up some other money to begin attacking the next one.
Right.
Yeah.
Good idea. Let's take another social media question.
Katie from Twitter asks, what % of your income should you be using if you're trying to live below your means? And how much of my income or what percentage should I be saving each month?
Excellent question. Good to review.
Yep. So my target is 15%. Is what I'm going to save across the board as
In all of your three little pots. Okay.
I'm going to start with that target number, and then as I have my eye on some large purchases, I might have another little fund that I stick some cash in there. But again, as a college student that may be making $300 or $400 a month, I think that 15% is a really nice target, because if you think about a college student that is working 10 hours a week, making $320 a month, if you save about 15 or 20% of that. At the end of 4 years as a college student kind of going out in the real world, you've got a nice little pot of money to help you make that next move, to put a down payment on an apartment or transition to a new city.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's take another question from social media.
This question is from Debbie on Facebook. How should my savings routine change from college to post-graduation?
Excellent question.
Right.
Well, we assume she's maybe making more money now,
Of
or
course.
at least she has her first job. What changes should be made?
Yeah, I think that because it's about habits, and that we wanted folks to develop those tendencies to put a little bit away every month. And so the ratio for me doesn't really change, right? It's about 15%. And hopefully you've got some savings goals, right? So 15% maybe for your long-term savings, and then you've got your eye on a better car.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned an emergency fund. There's also something, the transition fund.
Right.
What is that, and what do we need to be thinking about?
That's what I really focus on with undergraduate students, is that I don't want them to walk across that stage and get that nice bachelor's degree and not have any walking around money. And as we talk about the wage gap and about going out there and looking for a job, having some resources, having a little bit of wealth, having some the ability to make some choices. Again, that's that options that we want folks to have. And so that's what I want for folks is that transition fund. And again, I kind of did the math for you on about 15 or 20% of even a part-time student employment job, puts you in a $2,000 or $3,000 transition fund as you walk across that stage.
All right, let's go through the order of funds again. So emergency fund first, And then what do you fund next, and what do you fund?
So emergency fund is the first thing that I want to have, right? And so some people would start, for an undergraduate student that doesn't have a lot of responsibilities or expenses, $500 or $1,000 puts you between you and life, right? And gives you some options there. And then you've got your kind of what's your next big move. And for most undergraduates, it's I'm going to graduate, I need to make my next move. And so that's the sights that I'm setting on that next little pot of money.
All right, final thoughts. Easy, hard, sum this up. What do you want people to know, graduates to know?
Well, I don't think it has to be hard. And we want college students to be critical thinkers, and we want them to be educated folks. And so I think that a lot of people may stick their head in the sand around personal finance, and I want them to feel empowered and to know that there are resources out there, and that a lot of knowledge can take them places.
All right, well, fantastic. We thank you so much
Thank
for
you
your
so
time
much.
today. Such great information and advice. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And we'd like to thank again Sean McGreevy, a certified educator in personal finance from Chatham University. We thank him for joining us. And coming up later in our program, learn strategies to negotiate higher salaries in the workplace. But first, we're going to turn our attention to a topic that may not be on the minds of many recent college graduates, and that's long-term financial planning. Listen to what this expert has to say about how saving now can help you in the future secure a retirement.
When we look at people throughout their working years and saving for retirement, it's always this issue of, parting with that money today for some goal that appears to be so far into the future. And so we tend not to do it. Women even more so. Every choice that is made along the way from once you start working has an impact on your retirement. Leaving the workforce, for example, they want to start a family, they're going to take time off. One of the things that I always suggest is that when you're making that decision, a lot of times we think about, well, will we be able to afford to pay the mortgage and the 2 cars and everything else for me to stop working for a while? But what they never seem to say is, well, can we afford to save it for my retirement while I'm not working? One of the saddest things that I see across the board is really where a woman is relying on her spouse in order to plan for the future, plan for retirement, if for some reason the marriage ends. Well, if I haven't been in the workforce all these years and I've relied on my husband to save and all the money's in his name, now I have to go out and recreate my life at a very different point. At the end of the day, it makes sense, regardless of your marital situation, it makes sense for a woman to have money in her name earmarked for retirement.
And I'm very happy to welcome Shayna Bielik. She is a financial planning associate and client relationship advisor with Coghill Investment Strategies, LLC. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tonya. Thank you for having me.
What can women do from the very beginning, day one? What are some of the things they can do in the workforce to get ready?
First of all, start saving and save early. Having accounts in your own name, making sure you don't have debt. You're not burdened with debt. Yes, you want to have some credit cards and you want to have some autonomy and show that you have good credit, but you definitely do not want to step out with debt.
And always participate in your company's retirement
plan?
Always.
Always. Never, at least, we see a lot of women who participate, but not even up to the match. If I'm contributing 2% of my salary and if I go up to 3%, I get a match, I should definitely be at that 3% level. Otherwise, I'm leaving money on the table. So the first day you start that job, you sign up for the maximum contribution you can to the employer-sponsored plan. That way, you're just building a solid foundation and you're getting a match, you're getting some free money.
Right. Let's go to social media. A new question coming in from our audience.
Yep, this question was submitted on Facebook. I've been out of college for 2 years, and I'm worried that investing seems risky right now because I'm not making very much money at my first job. Advice?
Back
Very
to our
good.
risk
Right.
question, right? So really, if you're having the mentality that you're starting early with something, and it is diversified, it's always a great idea to kind of set it and forget it. And you'll be very surprised to see how that balance grows over time.
Right. Start early, and over the years, all of a sudden, and you don't typically see the ups and downs if you just sort of forget about it.
If you
right?
sort of forget about it.
Um,
Watching it every month can be it could be crazy.
Yeah. We want to take another question now from social media.
Kashira from Twitter asks, if I can't afford a financial advisor, what are some free, low-cost options to help me get my finances in order?
Ah, that's a great question.
It's a great question. And what I would say is use the internet as your source. There's a lot of great information on Fidelity's website or Vanguard's website. So there's a lot that you can actually self-manage on your own if you do the homework.
Okay, and so again, we want to invite our audience to message us on social media with questions. We have another question right now. Go ahead.
This question was submitted by Claire on Twitter. What kind of personal information do I need to provide a financial planner in order to receive best savings advice?
Good question.
Absolutely.
Because it can be intimidating going to a financial planner.
It is, and you know what? You have to give up a lot of, there should be no secrets. If I'm visiting with a financial planner and I'm ridden with all of this debt and the planner doesn't know about that, it's hard to help plan for the future. So my recommendation would be to be very forthcoming with your financial situation. What kind of debt do you carry? What property do you own? How much do you have invested? Maybe there's a potential inheritance down the road, or do I want to save for college education over retirement? Understanding your goals and objectives and really being open with that planner would be most helpful.
Right. Okay, we're going to take another question from social media.
Aubrey from Twitter asks, is there a particular retirement account I can open while I'm still in college?
Oh, this is a real overachiever. Thank you.
She is an overachiever. I like that. If you have earned income, you can open a traditional IRA. So while she's in college, the trigger is you have to have earned income. So if she's simply in school and not working, focusing on at least saving in another vehicle, non-retirement, whether it's a savings account or an investment account, is always a good idea.
Right. And so when you say earned income, it can be, even if it's $10,000 a year,
absolutely,
that counts as earned income. And
right.
If she wants to begin to save.
Right. If she earned $4,000, she can contribute $4,000 to that IRA.
How is it determined how much you can contribute annually? It varies by plan?
It does. 401ks differ from traditional IRAs, varies from SEP IRAs, so they all are different. With a SEP, we talked about up to 25% of your salary. It does typically go up about by $500 every year, so that it kind of keeps up with inflation.
Right. Okay, well, very good. We'll continue this conversation, but first, as part of our Closing the Gap campaign, we're inviting people to share their questions and comments about the gender wage gap by uploading videos to our website. Here's how to upload your video, and then look for your comment or question in an upcoming Closing the Gap special. We want to hear what you have to say about closing the gender pay gap.
My name is Amber and I'm from Bronx, New York.
I'm Stephanie from Ohio.
I'm Maggie and I'm from Pittsburgh.
From California.
I'm from Pennsylvania.
And I'm from Chicago.
Visit our website and upload a video with your questions.
My name is Lee, I live in Virginia, and my question to you all is, why do you think that the pay gap is still such an issue in 2015?
How should we better go about enforcing the idea that women should be paid equally to men?
Do you find that you have to ask for raises, and have you experienced repercussions for doing so?
Tell us lessons you learned the hard way.
I should have stood up for myself. Do not be afraid to ask for your review, and do not be afraid to ask for your raise.
Offer your words of advice.
Wage gap hits African American and Latina women hardest. To all my sisters of color out there, I have a message for you. Never stop doing and never stop trying.
If I ever had a wife and a daughter, I would want them to be paid fairly. I wouldn't want them to be taken advantage of at all.
And tell us what you're doing to help close the gender pay gap in your own life.
I want you to take those negative statistics and let them fuel you to be great.
Visit www.womenwagegap.org and upload your video today. Together, we can speed up the process of closing the gap. We appreciate your questions, and right now we're going to answer one of them.
My name is Lee. I live in Virginia, and my question to you all is, why do you think that the pay gap is still such an issue in 2015?
Some people think the wage gap is entirely about gender discrimination, and discrimination is part of the problem, but it's not the only factor. The wage gap is caused by a complex set of factors, causing women to earn less money overall in their lifetimes than men earn. Here's the whole story. Women make up half the workforce, and 6 out of every 10 American families rely on women's paychecks to make ends meet.
My daughter, she's a breadwinner. She works hard for her money.
Right now, my wife makes more than me.
Yet, U.S. Census Bureau statistics show there is no industry in America where women earn more than men.
For most women, they are in the workplace because they need to be working and they need the economic security.
Deborah Brake specializes in employment discrimination law and gender law, and she testified twice in Congress in support of fair pay legislation. It's a highly politicized and hotly debated topic.
Democrats want you to believe that Republicans do not support women.
So far, Republicans in Congress have been gumming up the works.
This statistic is the lightning rod for a lot of the argument.
Today, the average full-time working woman earns just 77 cents for every dollar a man earns.
It's a statistic that's easy to misinterpret and to manipulate. The big question that gets buried in the politicized fray is this: why? Why is the wage gap even wider for women of color? Why do so many women work in low-paying service jobs? Why do women with college degrees tend to pursue lower-paying occupations than men? Why do they tend to have shorter work histories than men? And why do women experience more career interruptions to care for family members? The answers reveal many gaps in many areas, and women feel the collective effect in their paychecks.
I think, first of all, the 77 cents on the dollar is an important number because it's a benchmark across time compared to men. That becomes probably a soundbite that every reporter can grab and every story can focus on. After that, though, it's a lot more complicated.
Sabina Dietrich conducts research on economic and community development, and she studied the range of factors that contribute to the wage gap.
We looked at gender wage gaps by age groups, by industries, by occupations across metropolitan areas in the country, and found that the places that had the best wages were the faster growing metropolitan areas. Civil service matters. Unions matter. State legislation can matter if you've got living wage legislation. Those are all parts of the reason for the wage gap persisting.
I think of it more as lost opportunity. For doing the amount of work that you're doing, you're not going to be bringing home as much as you should be for them.
If we're going to value the work that people do, I mean, a lot of us are underpaid as it is.
What does the wage gap mean for the financial security of America's families and for the economic security of the country as a whole?
Families absolutely need women's income, which makes it an issue of family security as much as a women's issue.
It's a women's issue, it's a country's issue, it's a civil issue, it's an equality issue.
So the gender pay gap is caused by many factors that lead to lost wages over a lifetime. And we're going to talk more in depth about one of those factors right now: women and negotiating skills. I'm happy to welcome Ayanna Ledford, who is the founding executive director of Progress, which stands for the Program for Research and Outreach on Gender Equity in Society. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
So, if you can kind of summarize, and even research has sort of backed this up, sort of the idea of women and difficulty when it comes to negotiating.
Yeah, so women are great negotiators. You know, they'll negotiate on behalf of things that they care for and love and believe in, but they hesitate when it comes to themselves. And it's because of a couple of factors. And one of those is the social backlash that they face. And also, you know, the confidence and not feeling as though they won't do it well enough.
Tell me a little bit more about the idea of the social backlash.
So when you negotiate, it's considered much more of a masculine type of skill, and so being perceived as being too assertive might put you in not as a favorable light to your prospective employer. So women hesitate when it comes to that because they don't, they want to be seen as a team player. And what they really need to see it as is that it's a win-win for both the employer and for yourself when you do advocate on your behalf.
Drive that home. Why is it a win-win? Why is it good for the employer as well?
Because they get a great employee with the skills that they're looking for, and you're satisfied and happy with the job that you secured and want to stay there.
Right. Now, there's so much more to talk about, but let's go to social media and take a question from there.
We actually have a few comments from social media that came in through Twitter. Samantha tweeted, "If you're good at what you do, don't be ashamed or afraid to negotiate." And we also have a tweet from Lachelle who said, "Never make negotiations on one item. It should be more than just salary." Ayana, do you have anything to add to these comments?
I agree with both the ladies. And what Samantha said about not being afraid, I mean, I've had college students before contact me about a negotiation, and one recently called me, attended a great university, very qualified, very skilled, smart, had a lot of volunteerism, and she was fearful to negotiate even over the phone and especially in person because she felt as though she wouldn't be considered as professional and she looked too young, is how she told me. And so she wanted to negotiate by email, which I said no.
Why do you say absolutely not by email?
Because you can't hear your tone and you don't want to face that backlash. So if you write an email, to you, it sounds as if you're being very professional, genuine, and authentic, and clear and direct. Well, if someone else read it, they might say, oh my gosh, why is she being so abrupt and not being perceived as likable as if she would have said it in person. And also over email, you can't tell the person's tone. So more importantly, I would prefer if you did it in person or a video cast, but if not over the phone so you could hear.
And so when it comes to college women, negotiating for their first job is probably more important than ever for a couple of reasons.
Yeah, so you're negotiating for that first salary that's going to set you up for retirement, that's going to set you up as a baseline when people ask, what did you make at your last position? So it's very, very important and critical to negotiate your salary, or at least making sure that you're getting paid the value of the job that you've entered.
Okay, because we are talking about a couple things. If you don't negotiate and have a decent starting salary, there's a snowball effect of money it can leave on the table over time, as you just said, and then also retirement. And when you're 22, you're not necessarily thinking about retirement, but lots of companies, if they offer the match, then it is important to have the highest starting salary possible.
Yeah, and as the last tweet that we received made the comment about making sure there's a lot of different options you're negotiating over. So if you're in undergrad and you're looking to go to graduate school, picking a job and seeing if they will pay for you to go to graduate school instead of accumulating more debt. So relocation expenses, one of your segments you talked about, the gentleman talked about saving money for when you leave school and you have that buffer. Well, looking at how can you add to that buffer, and it might be negotiating travel expenses and moving to that new position.
Right. So I think now we have a question from social media that we would like to take, and go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah, this question is from Eileen on Facebook, and she says, in addition to what you've already talked about with the dollar figure, what other items should be considered when negotiating your salary?
Okay, so we just touched on one. One, if you have to relocate, if they have to pay for college. I guess another question coming out of that, you feel like you're just coming out of school. This is your first job. Does anyone, male or female, really have any leverage? And for females in particular, what do you say to them about leverage in negotiating their first job?
You have accumulated skills in college. You know what the position posted. They wouldn't make an offer to you. Now, remind yourself that you're not going to negotiate until an offer has been made to you if they didn't really want you there. So that's apparent enough because they want to hire the most qualified, skilled person on their team, and that saves them money because you don't have to train someone new. And so you have to have that courage and that confidence and that understanding, knowing what your value is to negotiate.
So what are some of the common mistakes that women make? We know now, don't use email, but what are some of the common mistakes when they do go to negotiate?
So the common mistakes is not asking for enough. asking for maybe 30% lower than really what's out there, by not going to their networks or not looking on websites, reviewing different sites such as PayScale or the Department of Labor, not talking to their colleagues, male and female, in their industry to find out whether or not is this the right thing to ask for. And the biggest mistake is not saying anything at all, but you always should prepare. It's not that easy. It's easy once you practice, but you really should prepare upon entering your negotiation and practice.
So research number one, so that you know what you're asking for is reasonable and doable and makes sense. Do you have an opening line that you normally tell people? And if someone says no right off the bat, do I say okay and I go away, or do I go back to the table? How do you know when no means no?
Well, actually, no is a good thing to hear, because you've pushed the boundaries and you didn't leave anything on the table. So what you might say is, is there anything else, or what can we do to get close to that figure or those things I've asked for? What other opportunities are there in that range? So that way you continue the discussion. You just don't walk away and leave it there. You keep probing for more information.
Right.
So it's exciting to hear no. I'm always, when I give a workshop, I said, how many of you have negotiated before? And people raise their hand, and I said, well, how many of you have heard no before? And very few people, and I go, oh, well, that's disappointing, isn't it?
Because that means you weren't probably negotiating as much as you were worth.
Yeah.
Let's take another question from social media.
This question is from Sarah on Facebook. She asked, well, I'm a senior in college this year. What can I do now to prepare myself for my first salary negotiation?
Okay. So one of the important thing to do is, if you're still in school, is to look at your resume and look at your skills, and then look at the job that you're choosing to go, or the field that you're looking to go into. Are the volunteer opportunities that you're participating aligned to the job that you're looking to pursue in your profession? Are you working a part-time job that's applicable with skills that could transfer into the job of your industry of choice? Because that's going to give you more bargaining power, having real using your talent currently versus waiting till you go off college and saying, okay, this is my first real job.
Right, and so sort of bouncing off of that, how important is it to have volunteer work on your resume along with your academics? And when it comes to, is that a negotiating gem that you have to go with it in terms of being a solid person for the employer?
I think it is, because, in my opinion, it translates into real world experience. You could excel in academia if that's all you focus in, but are you diverse enough in your skills and be able to work with other people in the community beyond just on campus? How are you working in your industry versus just applying theory? So that's definitely a strong skill to have.
What about timing? Is there, so you already said you have to be offered the job first before you negotiate. Talk about the timing, and you don't do it in a job interview, correct? They always put on the application, salary requirements. Go too high, go too low, is there a rule there?
You want to get your target. So whatever that target is, based on realistic expectations. So there isn't some magic number that you put there. You have to do your research in advance, and you have to look at your skills to make sure they're aligned with that research you're doing. And don't just look at the title. The title might not just be it. It might be, you might have a different title, but these skills show that, wow, really, they're hiring me for this position, but it's really applicable to a different position and at a different range. So doing your research in advance is very, very important. And timing, after an offer has been made to you, definitely, and having time to prepare. So if you can ask them, when do you need to know by? Can I get 3 days, a week? So that way you can prepare and then practice with your peers and colleagues.
Right. Practice. One last question from social media.
Simone from Twitter asks, how does race affect negotiation in tandem with gender?
Excellent question.
Yeah. So as you know, with the wage gap, it's even worse for women of color. It's greater. And for women and people of color, such as myself, you need to really apply the same knowledge and skill base, which is you'll still face that same backlash if you're perceived in certain arenas too assertive and too aggressive. So it's really coming out with a conversation to negotiate as a form of a discussion and a conversation and working together.
All the more reason to practice.
All the more reason to practice, definitely.
And write it out, and you say it's a good idea to bounce it off of other people.
Yes, yes, yes. So it's good to get some feedback and talk to, I said, both men and women, and say, you know, how's this come across? What does this sound like? Is this something that do I come across as knowing what I want to say? Do you understand what I'm asking for? Am I clear and concise? And are my skills aligned for what I'm looking for too?
Last words of encouragement for our women out there?
You don't know unless you ask, right? So it's definitely important just to even try and start practicing with even just little things, and build up the confidence and just the ability to do so, and talk to your faculty advisors about your industry to find out what's negotiable, because they can provide you with a lot of insight that you might not be well aware of that you can negotiate over.
Right.
So yeah, practice.
So research, and don't be afraid to hear no. No is actually a good thing.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, we thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
We certainly do appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. We hope this Closing the Gap special presentation has given you more confidence to take charge of your personal finances, negotiate salaries on the job, and even think about financial planning for your retirement years. We'd love to hear your feedback about today's program, and we invite you to take a brief survey online at womenwagegap.org/survey. We also hope you'll continue the conversation about closing the gender pay gap. Talk about it at work, in social media, in your community, and with your representatives in government. Together, we can speed up the process of closing the gap. Closing the Gap, 50 Years Seeking Equal Pay is made possible by the Eden Hall Foundation seeks to improve the quality of life in Pittsburgh and southwestern Pennsylvania. Through the lens of women's issues, it continues the stewardship of Sebastian Mueller in the areas of human services, health, education, and the arts. And by Chatham University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has empowered women for 145 years, advancing women's causes with their Centers for Women in Politics, Entrepreneurship, and the new Chatham University Women's Institute opening in 2015. And these additional donors: Kathy Raphael, Buchanan Ingersoll and Rooney, PC, Georgia Berner, MSA, and the Women and Girls Foundation.